I wasn't joking a minute ago. I mean, a bit odd if I was, given that I'm preparing to talk to you about the countries now queuing up to condemn Israel for depriving Palestinians of human dignity in an ongoing massacre that, in my humble opinion, and having taken advisement from many of the world's leading genocide scholars, up to and including Kenneth Roth, the son of a Holocaust survivor, of course, and former head of Human Rights Watch, it looks to me as if history will adjudge what has happened and what is happening to be genocidal. I've thought that for some time, but I wasn't joking when I said to you that I very rarely feel that my vocabulary is inadequate. I don't mean that in a cocky way. I just mean that I contemplate Gaza now with the words, whether I'm thinking them or saying them out loud, that I have to talk about everything else. There's a reason why Holocaust is a word that is not used very often historically. I just referred to it then, and you know immediately what event I am referring to. It's almost as if some events are so awful that they need a word of their own, and we don't have one. I mean, genocide may end up being a word that is applied to what has happened and what is happening. Ethnic cleansing, I think, is pretty close to, inarguably, one description of what is going on. But they are words that, rightly or wrongly, don't have unique heft. You say genocide, you might think of Rwanda. You say ethnic cleansing, you might think of Yugoslavia. You don't have, at the moment, words to describe this specific event. And maybe that is fine. Maybe history will rank this alongside other atrocities, other horrors visited upon populations. And of course, given the way that we work in the West, the way our news supplies and our public interest and things like that, other things going on in the world get nothing like the attention that this does. Some people pretend not to understand the difference, of course, between the actions of an ally that enjoys enormous support from successive British governments and the actions of terrorists, for example, like Hamas, or rogue states, or very simply countries that are not our allies. Of course, you expect your friends, you expect more of your friends than you do of your enemies. But again, some people are very keen, and I can understand why some people are desperate to pretend that they don't understand that. So I mention that because unprecedented is an inadequate word. Inadequate is an inadequate word. Pivotal. The dam was always going to break when it came to international disapproval. It had to. Once it became clear that Netanyahu was on a path that brooked no criticism, and once you registered how successfully the ground had been seeded for that sort of impunity, how quickly people forget, how quickly people forget. The members of my profession who have latterly decided to ask one or two searching questions of Israeli policy, but who have spent, in some cases, decades being foursquare behind it. We confine ourselves, and again, it's probably wrong to do so, but we confine ourselves to events since the Hamas terror attack, the atrocity of October the 7th. Again, some people desperate to see that in isolation and not see it part of a broader picture. But if we were to confine our attentions to that period, the point at which it became clear that Israel's response was unconscionable, indefensible, and possibly genocidal is still debatable. For some governments, including some extremely close to London, like Dublin, the day had arrived pretty much 3, 4, 5 months later, by Valentine's Day of 2024. Other governments were making the kind of case that 25 nations, 28 actually, as I glance at the screen in front of me, it seems to have gone up since the newspapers were printed this morning. 28 countries condemning Israel's conduct, specifically in that case, the drip feeding of aid. Also, you may not be aware of this. Who was it I heard being interviewed recently? I heard a clip of it on it. Was it Kemi Badenoch, who didn't know about the so-called humanitarian city that Ian Katz The Israeli defense minister has proposed building just to move 600,000 Palestinians as if they were, I don't know, cattle to a place that many of them have no particular connection with and that has been heavily damaged through the war. 25 nations describing that plan today as completely unacceptable. But I don't think the leader of the opposition had heard about it. She was all over a story about a schoolgirl being put in detention for wearing a Union flag dress. That's the leader of the opposition for you. A cabinet reshuffle today, a shadow cabinet reshuffle today. I'm going to have to beg you to contain your excitement about that prospect. The delivery of aid is dangerous, according to the UK. The situation in Gaza is intolerable, according to Keir Starmer. And the queue of countries now is so long that you can barely see the back of it. In fact, in the context of current affairs or international alliances, the United States stands almost alone in its support or its failure to condemn or criticise Benjamin Netanyahu's government. A 2-month blockade. And this is the other thing that I can't quite square. There'll be so much that you don't know about. And in a way, that means I've let you down. I mean, if you're kind, trusting, daft enough to rely upon this programme or this radio station, not just me, of course, the news bulletins within this programme, as well as my colleagues on the presenting roster, if you rely upon us for the bulk of your news, for the bulk of your diet, your current affairs diet, then we've probably let you down because we have not bringing you daily detail of the deaths. There came a point, I don't know when it was, that it was almost as if we couldn't bear to contemplate it anymore. And you've also got other considerations to take into account. There is barely a single subject under the sun that you can talk about on the programme every day. I'm afraid for some people, small boats and refugees seem to fit into that category. But for me, there are perilously few subjects under the sun that you can talk about every single day. And Gaza became one of them. Again, I don't know when. I couldn't tell you precisely what the pivot point was that the world seemed to look away. And the attempts to minimise what was going on by somehow claiming that you can't trust the figures coming out of Gaza because Hamas runs the health ministry, but we won't let any journalists in to do their own research because reasons. And of course, some journalists, many journalists who did get in or who were based there in the first place have been killed by the IDF, as have many aid workers. But again, some people cling to the obvious nonsense that the IDF works tirelessly to avoid killing civilians. I mean, if it did, good Lord, then they need a little bit of a reset, don't they? And now you have this thing that was always going to happen. I can't remember when we first used the word pariah. Pariah is not an inadequate word, actually, is it? I think we had a conversation, you and me, and before that, me and the producer. I think we had a conversation about whether it would be appropriate to use the word pariah. And then, unless my memory's playing tricks on me, quite a long conversation, actually, because it's a pretty hefty word, particularly for people who quite understandably and rightly see Israel as the place that they can go to when it starts again. I don't know what the Jewish inherited reaction would be to things like the Farage riots and senior politicians in their own country essentially seeking to defend firebombs and attacks upon the police because of the perceived foreignness or wrongness of innocent people. Nothing wrong with going after, or nothing wrong with wanting the law to go after with people that have done things wrong, but terrorising entirely innocent people because of a very successful attempt to tar everybody with a brush. That's hideous. Pogroms, probably unique status in the collective memory of Jewish people. And Israel is where you go when it happens again, as history has taught us it almost certainly will. So for those people, Benjamin Netanyahu's successful recasting of Israel as an international pariah, if it isn't already, will be a disaster. Will be a disaster. And yet, is still not possible for me to find the correct words to frame what has happened. I've tried. I'll continue to try. I don't really worry. I used to share with you the ludicrous commentary that would come into this programme from people accusing me of anti-Semitism. I shared it because you don't live in this particular bubble. You probably didn't know that by saying killing babies is bad, please stop, you become anti-Semitic, or by saying destroying hospitals is bad, please stop, you become anti-Semitic. You may not have realised that, but these are people who have had an awful lot on the to contribute to public discourse, and they have lost. They've lost everything. They've lost all support, they've lost all sympathy, they've lost all credibility, because they continue to claim things that are obviously not true. Most obviously, that the IDF is not undertaking ethnic cleansing or quite possibly genocide, that it does deliberately or sets out to try to minimise civilian deaths, that it is somehow honest in its dealings, while simultaneously killing aid workers, killing journalists, and not letting my colleagues across the UK media into the Gaza Strip to report on what is actually happening there. And that's, that's a tragedy in many ways, but it's a tragedy that pales in comparison to the tragedy of the Palestinian people. So Israel has become a pariah. The only debate to have about that is whether you realise it yet or not. And if you don't, there's probably not a lot I can do to help you. I can't tell you the point at which Israel did become a pariah. Benjamin Netanyahu's Israel did become a pariah, but I can tell you that winning back the sort of sympathy that the country has enjoyed over the years, correctly in my view, and that will upset some people, is going to take generations. The scar that Gaza leaves on the collective memory of everybody is deep and permanent. And it's extraordinary that it has been permitted to happen. And I don't even know who you put on the hook for permitting it to happen. Because, as David Lammy uses ever more robust language as he joins ministers from Australia, from Canada, from France, to urge the Israeli government to lift these restrictions, particularly on aid, arguing, explaining that civilian suffering has reached new depths. You wonder whether there was anything they could ever have done to stop it. If they enjoy the support of the United States of America, they have really absolute freedom to do whatever they want. Air raids underway at the moment on Deir al-Balah, the main hub for humanitarian efforts in the devastated territory. I'll say that again. There's no aid getting in. There's precious little aid getting into the territory. What aid is getting in there is being run in ways that everybody expert and experienced in this field considers to be profoundly inadequate, and Israel's just launched air raids on it anyway. 85 Palestinians were killed while seeking food aid on Sunday, and that is what I mean by becoming inured to it. You should cry, either actually or metaphorically. 85 Palestinians killed while seeking food aid on Sunday, in what one newspaper describes this morning as a grim and almost daily slaughter. The UN Food Agency, you see why I can't do this every day. I mean, rightly or wrongly. So I couldn't bear to. You couldn't bear to listen. The UN Food Agency, the World Food Programme, said the majority of those killed had gathered near the border fence with Israel in the hope of getting some flour from a UN aid convoy when they were fired on by Israeli tanks and snipers. Keir Starmer said yesterday the situation on the ground in Gaza is intolerable and on so many levels, and we make absolutely clear in all our exchanges with Israel and with other countries. I think there is a naivety sometimes on what I don't think we should call the left. I don't think that it is fair to say that everybody right-wing, everybody who identifies as right-wing is comfortable with this carnage. Everybody who identifies as Israeli isn't comfortable with this carnage. Everybody who identifies as Jewish or who was born Jewish is not comfortable with this carnage, is likely to consider it as indefensible as you do. I genuinely believe that. But there are some people who perhaps are naive, and another inadequate phrase, they're largely on the left, and they seem to think, well, maybe they're right and I'm naive, that the UK government could have done more to stop this. But you've got 28 countries now queuing up to condemn Israel. And Israel won't even notice. In fact, if it hasn't accused all 28 countries of being anti-Semitic yet, then set your clock, because Benjamin Netanyahu will do soon. So what language do we use? And remember, it's very heavily policed language, very heavily policed. You can talk about the tens of thousands of dead people in Gaza and set your clock again by the speed with which one or two people will be demanding that you also remember the October the 7th terror attack, which absolutely nobody has forgotten. But it's as if you are desperate not to talk about what's actually happening today, so that you insist that everybody talks about something that happened a longish time ago in the scheme of things. So this is 28 countries with governments of all political persuasions. Of course, that won't stop some people from claiming that it's leftish or that it is anti-Semitic or that it is biased. It's not. It's humanitarian. Switzerland rarely gets involved. Italy, currently run by quasi-fascists. New Zealand, France, Canada, Australia. 27 nations plus the UK saying the war in Gaza must end now, and it won't. Why? I don't know. Probably because Benjamin Netanyahu fears he'll be in jail by Christmas if it does. I don't know. I don't really know what question to ask you. But I think I'll ask you this. What have you learned? 03456060973. What have you learned? Things that you didn't know before, things that may not have been true before. For example, I have learned that there is no international community capable of staying Benjamin Netanyahu's hand. For reasons I don't fully understand, the environment, the scene had been set for this so completely that he knew from the start no one would be able to stop him. Part of that will be due to domestic Israeli politics. Part of it will be due to Benjamin Netanyahu's own diabolical ambition. And part of it will be due to the response in what I'd loosely call the Anglosphere, although that probably denigrates Ireland a bit, because you step out of the United States, United Kingdom axis. Condemnation for Israel is loud and long. Of course, that involves the countries that have led it, like South Africa, being maligned and attacked by our newspapers and our commentators and our politicians quite often. But you've got 28 countries now just saying, stop. This is intolerable. Their words. This is my word, unconscionable. This is their words, completely unacceptable. And you know and I know that it won't stop. It won't stop. It won't stop, I fear, until there's nothing left. And the argument for shifting people to places that they don't want to go to becomes almost irresistible. Becomes completely irresistible, because logistically, how can you live in a desert? How can you live in a land of rubble and gravel when someone else offers you the opportunity or orders you to move and live somewhere else? That's not even an exaggeration. They've already done it. A humanitarian city. Almost as if language itself has been so completely debased by these people that they can describe a prison camp as a humanitarian city. Why on earth would I want to live in a humanitarian city? Oh, that's easy, because we've bombed and destroyed and razed to the ground absolutely everywhere else. Oh, spoiler alert, we've also done that to the place that we're going to call a humanitarian city and insist that you move to. What have you learned? 0345 6060973. And what will this... Actually, no, I'm not asking you that yet. I'll ask you that later. What have you learned I've learned that there was never any international community at all capable of stopping Benjamin Netanyahu from killing as many Palestinians as he pleased. And I've learned that in the last couple of years.